Happening, folks. For the first time in 2 years, I've not only missed my self-imposed weekly upload deadline, I have missed it by a considerable margin. Now, I don't think it's my fault. A wise man once said, a great artist will never blame his tools, and I happen to agree with that notion wholeheartedly. Now, as I'm never going to be a great artist, to the manufacturers of this 14mm t2.9 cinematic lens that I saved up for an entire year, and to you specifically, Ben, who sold it to me by convincing me this would be the way to go for my first big documentary, thanks very much. And go and fuck... Tillman Singer's 2024 horror film Cuckoo is a coming-of-age story about family and the complex, often complicated nature of familial bonds. It examines grief and youthful ignorance as it follows a 17-year-old protagonist named Gretchen. After the untimely death of her mother, she's forced to leave America to live in a resort in the Bavarian Alps with her father, his wife, and her half-sister Alma, who's frickin' adorable for the record. We never find out exactly what happened to Gretchen's mother, but it's clear from the opening scenes the death is weighing heavily on her teenage shoulders, and the last place she wants to be grieving is here, right now, with a collection of people who appear to be family to her only in name and possibly obligation. Overall, I really enjoyed Cuckoo. It's simultaneously straightforward and unapologetically cryptic. Clearly, Tillman's strength here is in showing you what is happening, but the more he tries telling you about what he's been showing you, the further he pushes you away from being able to enjoy any of it. To be clear, folks, I'm not blaming director Tillman Singer at all, but the insertion of an overly detailed explanation of all of the story events towards the end of the second act completely deleted all of the intrigue I was so enthralled with. And after reading through a bunch of critical reviews, I know I'm not the only person that feels this way. Like, most exposition dumps filmmakers are forced to throw in to keep modern audiences with no attention spans up to speed, Cuckoo's felt abrupt and out of place, and it diluted an entire film's worth of hard-earned atmosphere almost instantly. Both as a horror movie and as a film in general, I think Tillman Singer did a brilliant job with Cuckoo, and I think the late exposition dump was responsible for a lot of this movie's negative reviews. So today, I'm going to take you through the movie's major events to show you exactly what I'm talking about. Like now. The opening shots feature a violent shouting match between two adults. Their voices punch through the scene, but they're bathed in reverb to make them sound far away and echoey. Instead of showing either adult directly, Tillman casts their shadows up a staircase into a tight corner, reminiscent of some of horror's greatest moments. Distorting the pair's dimensions like this makes perfect sense when we realize we're viewing the domestic turmoil through the eyes of a young girl. Children subjected to this sort of thing often distance themselves from the violence by disassociating themselves from their mother and father, and what better way to portray that than turning them into a pair of twisted, faraway, faceless figures. And right as the shouting hits an unbearable peak, the young girl in the bedroom upstairs hears a piercing squawking through her window that sends her into a convulsion. And we're not sure if this is an exaggerated reaction to the psychological battering the poor girl is enduring, until the same shrieking calls her outside, where she ends up sprinting off barefoot into a pitch-black forest after it. That is how you open a horror movie, folks. It sets the tone, it introduces us to a major element of the story we're about to watch, but it gives away nothing. And that leaves us choking to find out what's going to happen next. When we catch up with Gretchen and her family arriving at the resort, Tillman plants a subtle hint things are off, and if you've a keen eye, you'll see the owner talking with some other guests, one of which is speaking with hand signals. This won't feel like a clue right away, but if you accept my suggestion there are no coincidences in a well-written screenplay, you'll likely put two and two together a moment later when we find out Gretchen's half-sister Alma can't speak either. A moment later, while the owner's welcoming Gretchen's father and stepmother back to the resort, Gretchen, the antisocial teen, heads off to hide in the ladies' room, where somebody silent and unseen tries opening the stall door in broad daylight. And after they're back in their new house, the family dog goes bonkers. Camera pulls focus over Gretchen's shoulder into the forest, where Singer's placed a few turquoise splotches to draw our attention, but he doesn't give us enough time to scour the entire scene. So far, so frickin' good, right? Not only are Gretchen's circumstances very heavy and unpleasant, there's also something else going on somewhere in the Bavarian background. And given they've just arrived and there's no possible way Gretchen could have done anything to draw this kind of unwanted attention, we really want to know who's following her. Gretchen's given a job in the resort's reception, as the owner wants to keep her occupied. The setting is unremarkable in every sense. There's a barely perceptible flute sound playing beneath the dialogue, which becomes relevant later. The color palette is muted 70s browns and beiges. Her co-worker Beatrix is wearing something most of us wouldn't be caught dead in. That tells us she couldn't care less about her appearance in this dull environment. And just as the mundanity is really setting in, one of the female guests vomits right in the lobby. And then, with the same casual, mundane tone, Beatrix tells Gretchen it happens sometimes, as if the Wi-Fi just flickered out. There are going to be inevitable cultural discrepancies anytime you transport an American teenager, well, anywhere outside of America, really. And Tillman Singer is using this reality to show us there's something wrong with this resort. The regular staff don't see vomiting around the floor as being a big deal. But we do. Then back at the house the next day, the weirdness shifts into high gear. As Gretchen's playing guitar in her room, Alma sneaks in to watch the way little sisters often do. That prompts the camera to remind us something is in the forest. Only this time, the something is right there. And when we hear the something shrieking over Gretchen's guitar, young Alma is sent into a convulsion. Then we're shown a tight shot of a peculiar patch of twitching flesh. And when Gretchen removes her headphones, the air around them starts fluxing. Music Gretchen was playing along to warps and slows down, and she gets trapped in a repetitive time loop. And she stays there, stunned, until Alma throws a defensive swipe up at her face. So far, so freaking good still, right? Time loops and tiny twitching patches of skin and something screaming through the trees? If you believe, like I believe, Hollywood has sucked all the originality out of horror and replaced it with predictable patterns and cheap repetition in the name of profit, this movie should have you squawking on your perch. It's clear now, despite her little sister doting after her, Gretchen is not comfortable in the company of her stepfamily, and she's going to have a tough time dealing with the new living arrangements in such a vulnerable state. As this movie's young protagonist, she has a very difficult journey ahead of her, and we in the audience understand the journey, and it feels natural and uncontrived. But also, what the fuck is in the forest? I just spit into the lens. That night at the resort, after watching more women get sick, the resort's owner calls, and he panics when Gretchen tells him she let Beatrix go home early. He tells her he's coming to pick her up immediately, but she insists on taking her bike home. Her tone tells us she's not going to do what this guy's telling her to do no matter what it is. And that fits her current disposition perfectly. As she starts pedaling home, the owner screeches in up the other side of the driveway, further emphasizing his panic state. And a moment later, we see what might be causing his panic. As Gretchen's pedaling away against the impossibly dark background, I've taken the liberty of brightening things up a bit to show you this. Then the camera pans left, and we're shown some wonderfully uncanny imagery of the figure starting its pursuit at an unnaturally quick pace. Gretchen's headphones shield her from picking up on any of the noises, so by the time she clues in, it's nearly too late. And after barely making it to the safety of a hospital, she gets to see exactly what's been chasing her this whole time. And the figure does not look at all like what we were expecting to see. And at the same time, her little sister Alma has been admitted to the same hospital after suffering another seizure. Now, if you weren't paying attention to me earlier, you'd probably just write it off as a coincidence, but if you were paying attention, you would remember there are no coincidences in a well-written movie, and Alma got admitted to the hospital at the exact same time Gretchen was being squawked at. Gretchen goes on to meet a girl named Ed in the resort, and Ed invites her to join her in Paris, and Gretchen agrees. She also meets a police officer who claims to be investigating the woman chasing Gretchen. When Gretchen and Ed attempt to leave for Paris, the air starts fluxing in the car, and they get caught in a time loop as they're headed off at the pass by the squawking blonde woman. After she wakes up in a hospital, the resort owner tells her in no uncertain terms to remain indoors from here on in, and the police officer and enlists Gretchen's help in finding the mysterious blonde lady. In exchange, he assures her he'll protect her and take her wherever she wants to go when they're all done. While they're staking out the resort, they catch Gretchen's co-worker Beatrix having a bit of a fling with a local police officer. Instead of imploring cheap jump scares, Singer prepares us for what's about to happen with quick shots of the darkness outside the windows and the frantic sounds of fluttering birds hightailing their way out of the forest. And while the officer's tidying up, he gets trapped in a time loop, along with Beatrix, over the squawking sound and a close-up shot of twitching skin. And the time loop is interrupted when this comes around the corner. Due to the fractured nature of the time loops, Beatrix has no time at all to react. The blonde woman glitches from rounding the corner to the foot of the bed in an instant. Through the window, the officer sees the man debilitated on the floor. Beatrix is then clapped around the ears, and that sends her to the bed, rubbing away at her thighs as if to prepare herself for something. And the blonde woman produces a slimy payload from somewhere I would never like to visit. But Gretchen interrupts the process, and we're left wondering what the blonde woman is and what the hell she was trying to do. And it is a wonderful state of cluelessness to be stuck in at the halfway point of a movie. The next morning, Gretchen finds out her father sold the family home, meaning they have no intention of heading back to America. Gretchen doesn't take it very well, but when she's rifling through a box of her mother's possessions, she finds a voice recording left on the answering machine. Without mentioning anything, her little sister Alma, unaware Gretchen's mother passed away, used a text-to-voice service to ask her to come visit Gretchen so she would stop being so sad. The heartfelt gesture forces Gretchen to reconsider her current worldview. After an angry outburst with Gretchen calling the resort owner out over his potentially sinister intentions for the family, he subdues the police officer, sprays Gretchen with an unknown substance, and imprisons her. At this point, we're just over an hour into the runtime. We have a solid understanding of our protagonist's inner struggles. We understand as much as we can about her outer struggles with these bizarre story events, and we've watched a natural, positive progression occur in Gretchen's thinking. She's grown, and there's definite hope she'll be able to change by the end of the story. And for me, this is when the wheels come right off the horror trolley. The resort owner sprayed Gretchen with pheromones and called another one of the unusual women in from the forest with a flute he uses to control them. And after setting her upon Gretchen the same way the blonde lady did with Beatrix, the resort owner literally looks right into the camera and delivers a monologue telling the audience. The resort owner uses the location's intentional honeymoon getaway aesthetic to lure unsuspecting couples into spending romantic weekends there. And once they've settled in, the wives are stunned and debilitated. By a shrill shrieking sound emitted by a species of bird woman, the resort owner is actively involved in breeding and preserving. With the women stunned and prepared, the bird woman manually impregnates them with her own bird woman offspring. The initial shrieking temporarily wipes the women's memories as well, so they go on to birth and raise the hybrid offspring as if they were their own. And it is worth noting, the resulting child is incapable of speech. In nature, the common cuckoo bird deposits its eggs into the nests of other birds to be raised by unsuspecting surrogate mothers, with the actual mother never to return. But this particular species of bird woman has retained some of its human motherly instincts, and it will eventually return to protect the child. And as such, the blonde woman has been pursuing Gretchen the whole time because she views her as a threat to her daughter, Alma, who is Gretchen's non-speaking, half-bird, half-sister, a direct result of Gretchen's father and stepmother visiting the Bavarian resort themselves 9 years earlier. Now, if you're the type of person who prefers knowing everything about what's going on, you might be happy to hear this detailed explanation. But if you prefer interpreting what you've seen and being able to think about it, and maybe even not knowing why you're feeling all creeped out, these sorts of expository dumps can take all the intrigue and mystery right out of the movie. For me, even the Cuckoo title was too on the nose. I'm not suggesting there's anything binary about this. No side is right or wrong. But I do believe there's a happy medium. This sort of extreme extreme over-explaining will alienate a significant portion of the audience. In horror films, I believe the term uncanny is somewhat overused, while the actual effect remains tragically underused. The term itself, initially coined about 100 years ago by Sigmund Freud, basically refers to the psychological experience of an event or thing that is unsettling in a way that feels oddly familiar, rather than simply being weird or mysterious. Tillman Singer wanted to unsettle us using uncanny imagery in Cuckoo, not so much by giving birds human characteristics, but by giving humans bird characteristics. And he didn't stop at merely giving the movie's pseudo-monster plumage and awkward muscular spasms. He honed right in on something equally unsettling to maximize the effect. Many members of the audience would have found combining the reproductive behaviors of two very different species uncanny on its own. Unless, of course, the entire process was explained to them in intricate detail. If you explain something uncanny or irrational, you're rationalizing it. That takes us right out of the story world and forces us into analytical mode. And in analytical mode, we would inevitably judge the concept as being stupid, because here, in reality, it fucking is. Remember this creepy scene when a seemingly normal woman off in the distance hurtled through a dark forest with ungodly speed towards our unsuspecting young protagonist? Does it land differently for you like this? You bet your ass it does. I'm going to leave the exact details of the ending out of this review. Suffice it to say, alongside all the peculiarities and the grossness, and because of them, Gretchen's character goes on to progress through the various stages of a positive character arc in a surprisingly traditional manner. She begins with flawed views, and the various events and interactions of the story force her to learn and grow until her beliefs are positively altered as she becomes the hero her little sister needs her to be by the end of the movie. As I see it, in every sense, this is a very, very good movie that could have been great. Excessive exposition can ruin a horror film. It breaks the tension and dispels the mystery we love engaging with. Horror thrives on uncertainty and ambiguity and the fear of the unknown, and too much explanation makes the unknown known. And that takes away the sense of otherworldliness and danger. When everything's spelled out for you, the audience has much less room to imagine the worst, and that is what horror filmmakers should always be encouraging us to imagine. And this is why the most effective horror movies give just enough exposition to provide a foothold for the audience while leaving all the key elements still up in the air. Holding back a bit on the information allows the tone and the atmosphere to drive our imaginations, which ultimately, more so than any amount of fake blood or special effects, is where the actual fear comes from for each of us. And if the Hollywood producers could pick up on this simple fact and stop forcing Hollywood directors to constantly dumb everything down, I think we'd be in a much better place. As always, it is great to be back. Thank you very much for watching. If you've seen Cuckoo already, let me know what you thought about it down in the comments. And until next time, folks,